So the purpose of this series of videos is to create a list of games associated with a particular subject. A lot of times, since I do a lot of war games, it'll be a particular battle, war, general, that kind of thing. I chose the games on this list because of their general availability on the new and used market. They had to be out there in some form and fairly easy to find. I also tended to go towards games that were available on Vassal so that you could buy a game and then play it over the internet with other people. The games are ordered roughly by their complexity, from the easiest to the most complex. And surprisingly, I only found about 7 games on the Battle of Midway that met this criteria. So let's go through some of them. One of the greatest naval battles of all time, the Battle of Midway, was fought between the forces of the Imperial Japanese Navy and the United States Navy on June 4th of 1942. It occurred 1,110 miles west of Hawaii near the small island atoll of Midway. There, a Japanese naval force under Admiral Yamamoto attempted to set an ambush for the U.S. carrier fleet. Unfortunately for the Japanese, the United States Navy had intercepted communications and was prepared for the ensuing battle. United States Admiral Chester Nimitz sent the Navy's 3 available carriers, the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown, westward to engage the Japanese carriers. The battle began at 0430 when the Japanese, unaware of the location of the nearby enemy carrier force, sent a number of planes to destroy the airbase on Midway. By 10:30 a.m., however, American torpedo and dive bombers had discovered the Japanese carriers Akagi, Soryu, and Kaga, and soon reduced them to flaming hulks. The sole remaining Japanese carrier, the Hiryu, was able to get off an attack that badly damaged the U.S. carrier Yorktown before it too was destroyed. And the subsequent loss of 4 carriers and 330 aircraft and their trained pilots crippled the Japanese naval power for pretty much the rest of the war. The Battle of Midway was probably the most decisive naval engagement between Japan and U.S. in the Second World War, and it was also the beginning of the end for Japan's hopes for domination in the Pacific. The first game on this list is Kido Butai, Japan's Carriers at Midway, and it was published in 2016 by the German game company Dr. Richter Conflict Simulationen. Now, it is a solitaire game, and it's fairly simple to play. It has an 8-page rulebook, a 8 by 12-inch map, and 55 die-cut counters. And essentially, you're placed in the position of Chuichi Nagumo, the admiral that was in charge of the Japanese carrier fleet at Midway. And you have to make decisions on how you're going to attack and arm your aircraft, as well as managing your combat air patrols. The AI is the American carrier fleet, which can constantly throw wrenches in your plans and eventually sink your carriers. Another fairly simple game of Midway is Victory at Midway, which was published in 1992 in Command Magazine. It has 11 pages of rules, 2 maps, and 191 die-cut counters. And this is a double-blind game, kind of like the game Battleship. It has a fairly simple combat system where battles are resolved by comparing a die roll to the unit's strength for a successful hit instead of referring to any charts, so it can play pretty fast, taking only an hour or 2 to play. And the thing that stands out in this game is that without any knowledge of your opponent's fleet position, you have to rely on moving, conducting aerial reconnaissance, and designating areas for airstrikes. It also includes ship-to-ship combat, bombardment, and invasion of land targets. And in many ways, it's a lot like the next game that we'll talk about. Now, the benchmark for Midway games is probably still Avalon Hill's Midway. This was produced in 1964 and is still highly relevant today. It had a 24-page rule book, which is quite easy to read. It had 150 counters, and it had 3 boards. There were 2 search boards where you searched for the enemy ships, and it had a battle board where you would carry out the actual raids on the ships themselves. And the raids could be either through air action or from ship to ship. For being such a simple game, this game is strategically very complex, and people play and replay this game hundreds of times and find all sorts of new types of tactics to use to try to defeat their opponent. Now, one of the newer games on this list is Fury at Midway, and it came out in 2020, was published by Revolution Games. It has 2 11 by 17-inch maps, 72 counters, 12 cards, and a 12-page rule booklet. Now, unlike the other games on this list, the primary focus on the game is on air operations, and players have to make important decisions on when they want to strike and with what planes they want to use to do so. They also have to decide how they're going to use their planes to defend their carriers. The next game on this list is The Fires of Midway, and it was published in 2010 by Clash of Arms Games. It has 200 playing cards and a sheet of counters, a 16-page basic rulebook, and a 24-page advanced rulebook. Now, unlike all the other games on this list, which are pretty much straight board and counter war games, this one is a card-based war game. It uses Clash of Arms' Hell of Stalingrad system, and strategic decisions are carried out by managing one's hands of cards. One thing nice about this game is it contains separate scenarios for 4 major carrier battles of 42, Coral Sea, Midway, the Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz. These can also be linked up to play a campaign game, and the game is playable in solo mode. Now, if you were looking for kind of the ultimate Midway game, you'd probably want to go with CV, a game of the Battle of Midway. This was published in 1979 by Yaquinto Games, and its designer was S. Craig Taylor, who was also the designer of Wooden Ships and Iron Men and Flat Top, and he used the Flat Top system for this game. The game contains 2 21.5 by 27.5 maps, 800 die-cut counters, as well as a fairly thick rulebook. And this game is probably the only game out there that looks at the battle with some complexity. It includes factors such as observation and intelligence, combat, plane repair, readying planes, ammunition supply, bomb types, night movement, and weather. It's a great game, but you do have to work for it. Finally, this list would be incomplete if I didn't include Mark Herman's classic 1985 game, Pacific War, The Struggles Against Japan, 1941 to 1945. And this was another one of those excellent publications of Victory Games. It's recently been re-released by GMT Games. Now, this game is a monster. It has 2 22 by 34-inch maps. It has over 2,500 counters. The rulebook is 68 pages. There's about 60 or 70 different scenarios that can be played, and one of these scenarios is Midway. And while this game is complex, it's also very rewarding to play. Like I say, you can play it as individual scenarios with about every major battle in the Pacific Theater, or you can play a huge operational campaign game. So if you've got a lot of time to sit down and play a highly detailed Pacific Theater game, this is probably what you might want to look at. Anyway, that's what I got for Battle of Midway. I think the anniversary of the battle is coming up here next week, so that's why I thought I'd put this out here. If you have any other games specific to the Battle of Midway, please list them down below. I'd like to kind of check them out, as I kind of like games of this sort. So now I'm planning on getting this week's usual video up on Saturday, which will be Avalon Hills Midway. And again, I'll do a little more detailed background into the battle itself. I will have a rules overview, and then I'll do a playthrough. Looking forward to seeing you then, and thanks for watching.